Joe Popp from Popp Rock Shop, and today I'm going to be talking about a very special amp that I built for my best friend Martin Rice, who's also the bass player in our band. And he's helped me out so much over the years. I wanted to build this amp for him. I actually started it in 2019. I started cutting the circuit board, and I finished the original version in 2022, and it had one little hum problem with it, and I went to go grab it off the shelf, and I didn't discharge the caps all the way, shocked myself. I dropped the amp, smashed it all over the floor, the tubes, I bent the chassis, all kinds of problems, so I had to take all the parts out, put it into a new chassis, and after all these years, here we are in 2024, November, and I finally finished it. And I'm really happy because Martin has done a lot for me, and I really wanted him to have a really nice amp. Currently he's playing this Fender solid state thing that he found at a garage sale, and I just can't look at it. So I made him this amp, and I'm going to be really glad to deliver it. So basically it's a JMP50 JCM800 and 2204 Master Volume circuit that all you know that I like to build, and that's my favorite Marshall circuit. Has a few mods to it, a little bit more gain in the preamp section. It does have this cap clipper, which I'm going to talk about, the bright cap clipper. And it's all handmade turret board as opposed to a printed circuit board. So it's all point-to-point construction. And I designed it to be really compact. Originally it was going to be a head and a cabinet. And as Martin and I have gotten older, we don't need these big amps laying around our houses. So I repurposed it and put it into this little 112 cabinet that I actually had made for a different amp back in 2010. So let's begin with some clean tones. I'm going to leave the cap in as a stock Marshall would have it, and you'll see how bright it is at a lower volume. Now I can clip the cap out by using this little switch, and you can see how much warmer it sounds. Now, of course, there's a full EQ on here, so I could dial it in even further, but that cap clipper is really nice to have when you're playing at lower volumes. It does have a nice chimey sound. I chose a Celestion MC90 Black Shadow made by Mesa Boogie, branded by Mesa Boogie. And let's go ahead and get some crunchy tones and see what that sounds like. I don't think this thing is going to see a lot of clean tones from Martin, so let's see how it sounds crunched up. I'm going to put the preamp all the way up to 11. Yes, it does go up to 11, as you'll see later on. And I'm going to slowly bring up the master volume. That'll keep going on forever. So a really nice, crunchy little amp and a compact cabinet that Mark can throw in the back of his Mazda if he wants to go play a gig or jam with some dudes. And I'm really happy to get him this amp. So let's look at the guts of this JEP50 custom made for Martin Rice. We're going to start with the circuit board. The circuit board is made out of Paxilin, which is a material that Marshall used in the 60s. And I hand drilled this and hand turreted it. You can see these little posts here are called turrets. Looking at some of the components, I used Pyre resistors, which were popular in Marshalls in the 60s. And then I used mustard caps. You can see these are made by Millard. The first one's made by Bianchi. But they were all made in the same factory, and these are supposed to give really, really great tone. I did use some monitored components like the Sozo caps here. And this little cap here, and of course the power section I used Sprague Atom capacitors, oversized diodes, and an overrated resistor in this position here for better power handling. Some of the other components are standard Marshall cliff jacks for the input, output, and speaker jacks. I did keep the treble peaking circuit, which I used to cut out of all my amps, but I'm trying to go for a really accurate tone here. So I kept this in. I used alpha pots on all the volume and tone controls. You can see the switch here. There's a bright cap across this potentiometer here, and a lot of people clip that out because at lower volume it sounds a little bit beefier. With the cap in at lower volume it sounds bright. So this allows you to switch that cap in and out with this little switch right here. I use shielded wire to the V1 tube on both inputs. I use built-in sockets for all of the tube socket positions. F&T capacitors for the cap cans, for the filter caps. There's another one under the board under here. Another cool section is this right here. This is actually an external biasing circuit. There's a pot that has a locking nut on it, and then there's a negative and a positive for each tube, so you can bias the amp without having to take it out of the chassis. Pretty cool feature. It's a standard 50 watt chassis. It's going to bolt into a normal Marshall cabinet. Carling switches for the power and standby. The transformers are Hammond. For the power, the output, and the choke is also a Hammond. So here's the top of the Martin Rice JEP50 custom amplifier. We have a Hammond 290 GC power transformer. We have a Hammond 1750N output transformer. We have a Hammond 3 Henry 250 milliamp choke. We have 3 F&T cap cans for filter caps. We have 2 JJ EL34-2, which adds a little bit of low end according to JJ tubes. For the V3 position, I used an Electro-Harmonix 12AX7. They're very low in noise. And for V1 and V2, I chose Pisvane, P-S-V-A-N-E, ECC 83s because they're really high gain and they were available at the time. So these are really good sounding tubes. So let's look at the back of the amplifier now, the Martin Rice Custom JEP50. You can see I did custom panels that have my name on it. I'm going to add a serial number here in a little bit. I think I might put his wife's name on there. Speaker jacks, 2 normal cliff jacks for speakers. There's an impedance selector switch on here. Even though it's going to be in a combo, the amp can be taken out and put into a head, so I wanted to have the ability to select different impedances for different speaker cabinets. You can also see here from the outside the bias adjust circuit that I put in. There's a ground, there's a V4 and a V5 connection, and this is so you can adjust the bias with this bias pot right here. It's got a locking nut on it, so once you set the bias you can lock it down. It's a really handy feature because you don't have to pull the amplifier out of the head cabinet to set the bias. Standard HT fuse, standard mains fuse, and this is a little thing that I do on a lot of amps. This is a Neutrik PowerCon locking connector, and this is so if somebody steps on the connector, a normal IEC connector will just pop right out, whereas this stays locked in place. So here's the front of the amp. You can see I used Allumamark, which allowed me to custom engrave my own name on here. I also changed all the volume and tone pots to 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, so the amp actually does go to 11. This is the cap clipper switch that I talked about in the bottom picture of the amp, and this just allows you to clip out that bright cap right from the front panel of the amp. Other controls are all standard, JMP50, JCM800, controls presence, bass, middle, treble, master, preamp, a high input and a low input. These are Bakelite knobs made in the 60s. They were very hard to locate, but I wanted something special for this amp. A standard Marshall indicator, just for knowing that the amp's on or off. And these really cool JTM trim rings for the switches, which are Carling switches. Let's look at the cabinet this amplifier is going in. This is sort of a modified 18 watt Marshall 112 cabinet. It's a lot more narrow, and it's a couple inches deeper because the 50 watt chassis, the tubes are longer than the 18 watt EL84s, so I had it built deeper to accommodate the longer tubes. There's a vent along the top here to let some of the air out. As the amp sits like this, the tubes are sitting out this way. It's kind of like a blues breaker look with the pinstripe grill, the white piping along the front, and the gold piping along the top. It's got radiused corners, which look real nice. And of course the new Popp logo installed right on there. There is a 112 speaker cutout behind the grill, of course. And it's great because it's very compact, so that it can be moved around easily. And I just love this little cabinet, and I'm glad to be giving it to my buddy Martin. So here's the top of the cabinet. You could notice that the controls are actually facing the wrong way. So if you wanted to adjust the amp while you're performing, they're actually going to be upside down. The reason for this is if you ever want to pull the amp out of this cabinet and put it in a head cabinet, the controls will be the right way. And this is actually the way the old Blues Breaker amps used to be. They only made one chassis that went in a combo and went in a head cabinet, so it's sort of reminiscent of that. Okay, so here's the back of the cabinet showing how the speaker is installed. I have a Mesa Boogie Black Shadow MC90 made by Celestion, and I really love this speaker. I had one in my Mesa Boogie combo back in the 80s, and it's just a really good sounding speaker, and it also handles a lot of power. For the combo, it needed to be a single speaker that could take the power of the JCM 800 circuit that puts out about 50 watts. You can see I bolted this in with 4 very heavy-duty cage bolts to bolt the chassis to the back panel. Then there's 6 screws here that can be removed. If you want to pull the whole chassis out, you can do that just like that. It's a really compact, beautiful solution for a high-powered combo amp. I hope you enjoyed this overview of the Martin Rice JEP50 Master Volume by Popp Rock Shop.
Popp Rock Shop. We make cool stuff.